School is about more than just academics. It's a place where young people, they are interacting with each other, they're interacting with adults, they're also getting this social, emotional aspect to their education.
I'm proud to work every day with Patrice Relaford, who leads that education work for us and has done an exceptional job of looking at the needs of this community in education and pivoting our work to do our very best job of moving the most important levers we can. Today we hear about our work in public policy and from a wonderful and very diverse group talking about key actions taking place in literacy.
We're talking about literacy now because it is the issue of our generation. For decades now, the way we've been teaching young people to read did not match up with the science around how humans learn to read. The way policy and literacy come together is that it took policy change for Minnesota to deeply examine how we are supporting our schools to teach literacy and then to make changes, and now policy will help us to live into those changes. So we have policy, literacy, through line, but it takes leadership to be able to navigate us through this change. And it's not just leadership at the state level, leadership at the district level, leadership in the building. And so with that, that's where the principals and their voice also comes in, because they are seeing the work on the ground. They know how it's impacting their young people, they know how it's impacting their teachers, and they know how it's impacting the families who are connected to their schools. You make a change, but then you have to live into implementing the change, and that's really where the meat of the work occurs. You can get people to buy into a change, but it's when it comes to implementing the change that sometimes people forget. That's really where you have to continue to reinforce that goodwill and that willingness to learn, adapt, change, and do things differently.
We ask you to not only listen, but also figure out what part of this can you be part of. Join us in making the education of our children as meaningful as it needs to be.
Good morning. I am Michael Rodriguez, Dean of the College of Education and Human Development, and I am happy to welcome you to the University of Minnesota, the Twin Cities campus. We are a system. There are 5 campuses, and we are bracing ourselves for a new president, Rebecca Cunningham, who, as I understand, has wrapped up her work at the University of Michigan. She was vice president of research. She will be joining us this summer. I've had the great opportunity to meet her and have a couple conversations with her. And she is dedicated to education from cradle through life. So we're really excited to have her join us and have her learn a little bit more about the Reimagine education effort, which I've been involved with. I first saw RT on our campus at a homecoming parade, and he was surrounded by groupies, as he usually is, with signs that said, "The mayor," and the signs were going like this, pointing to the mayor, and RT's running through the homecoming parade, and I said, "That's how I want to roll." Then he became involved with Generation Next, the collective impact effort in the Twin Cities, and I've been involved with Generation Next since the beginning and was really excited that we had such a vibrant, caring person who was so connected to community. And then we lost him, and I thought, what a loss. I don't know how we're gonna deal without RT in such a position. And somehow he found himself at the Minneapolis Foundation. And yep. And foundations have a spotty history with investment in education reform. And often because It's directed not by evidence, it's directed not by expertise, it's directed by goodwill, and it's directed by best wishes. But oftentimes goodwill and best wishes are not enough. And the fact that we have somebody at the helm of the Minneapolis Foundation that is grounded in community and understands what it is for a neighborhood kid to be able to go to a neighborhood school that offers the best education has to offer was transformative. And so I am so happy to be able to be part of the Minneapolis Foundation, the Reimagine education effort, because it is now becoming grounded in evidence and research, and it's connecting families, communities, and schools in ways that for a long time philanthropy hasn't really done. Philanthropy has always looked for alternatives. But if we can't take care of the kids and families in our own communities and their neighborhood schools, we're just not going to make a difference. Minneapolis Foundation is making a difference with their investment in Minneapolis and the foundation. So I'm very happy to have this event here on our campus. We hope to be good partners, and we hope to be good neighbors, because we all depend on every kid in Minneapolis getting the best we have to offer. And the best we have to offer this morning is my favorite CEO and president of a foundation, R.T. Ryback. So welcome, everyone.
Well, thank you. Thank you, that was wonderful. There's actually no person on the planet who I admire more in education than Dr. Rodriguez, so that was a little bit like Anthony Edwards saying he likes my dunk shot, so thank you. Or my tourism slogan, but that's another topic. Hey, it's really wonderful to have everyone here today. I'm R.T. Ryback from the Minneapolis Foundation. Could everyone from the foundation staff raise your hand and give a wave here? This is a wonderful group of folks. And the great thing about your introduction is it was totally true, except I'm not the one who leads the education work. I run the foundation, but you're going to be hearing from Patrice Relaford, whose vision this work all is, and I'm really blessed to work with her. The foundation is a foundation, but let's forget that word for a second, because what we really are is we're a community of generosity. And what that means is that about 108 years ago, some people in Minneapolis decided that there should be a resource at the center of this community that's really controlled by the community, not by any one individual, and that institution should figure out some way that's not about the political way to run a city or the business way to run a city, but the civic infrastructure. What is it that at the core of a community is the power of collected action that you have when any issue comes up? And so for over a century, the Minneapolis Foundation has been able to do that. We do that because we control some dollars that we've been given. We also are a place where individuals can open up their own fund, and just like somebody's your advisor to make the money, we're the advisors to help give it away. And in that century we've been doing the work, education has been one of the top two issues for the entire time. So you stop and think about that. If we've been doing this for a century and we haven't made more progress, ask yourself, I think everyone in this room cares about education. We've probably all, on big and small levels, been doing something about it. But no one person, not even Michael Rodriguez, can really make education better. This takes a village, literally. And so the reason it's so powerful to look at all of you here is you come from these different backgrounds. There are superintendents, there are curriculum leaders, there are fund holders, there are family members, there are political folks, all of us together working together. So what we want to do today is to give you an overview of what we're doing in our education work, and hopefully give you a sense of how can you also be a partner in that. The hallmarks of our education work are in two areas. You'll hear about them today. One is in leadership, especially the work we've been doing with principals, you'll hear about in a second, and also in literacy. And there is a monumental shift taking place in education, and many of the players who were central to that are in this room today. So what I want to do, if we could, is to start our first panel, and I want to ask them up. Dr. Katie Pickel leads all the leadership work here at the University of Minnesota. Why don't you come on up? Are we? Oh, here we are, right here. Okay. Kenneth Abon, who leads our policy work, and then Dr. I think you should be a doctor representative. Yes, so yes. An educator who's gone into the legislature, Representative Mary Frances Cardy. Thank you all for being here. When I talked about what a foundation does, I talked about the fact that we make grants and so do our fund holders. But we've increasingly recognized what Patrice said in the video, that money alone will not solve this issue. And one of the things you'll be hearing about today is what we've been doing in some of our policy work. And so I want to start with Kenneth here on my right, who leads that work under Patrice's direction. Can you just give us a top line about the policy work we've had at the legislature this year, especially in education?
Yeah, thank you for having me, and excited to talk about this work today. You know, it was really a pleasure to work with the foundation and think about the way that, you know, all the contributions that are made to the foundation really lead to grant making, but also lead to changing policy, and seeing that as a lever of change and what that really means for our community. Not only do we just disperse money, but you also are a part of the changes that eliminate barriers for folks. And so some of the work that I was able to support the foundation in really leading on is making sure that our immigrant neighbors are have a good relationship with law enforcement, and looking at making sure that all of our everybody in our community is recognized and has equal rights in our state constitution, along with also ensuring that young people are required and mandated to have some type of representation in any type of interrogation. When we look at our education work specifically, we really were focused on making sure that schools were not losing money because of this amazing thing that happened with universal school meals. But there was a concern about schools losing money because it was connected to our funding for compensatory aid. And so wanting to make sure schools were held harmless from any losses due to that. And then looking at the principal survey and elevating the voices of principals across the state, and really investing in elevating leadership in that way. And then the READ Act, of course, and making sure that there's additional investment in supporting the READ Act and the implementation of that.
Great. So these two pillars of our education work, literacy and leadership, we're going to be hearing about. The READ Act, we're going to come up on the next panel. But right now we want to talk about the principal survey. Talk about why you and Patrice thought it was so important for us to be involved in helping the state consistently fund a survey of our principals.
You know, I think, you know, these two can actually speak more to that. But I think, you know, we really underwent this route around trying to engage the legislature around this work because we knew how important the findings of the first two iterations of this survey have been so far. And so looking at that and seeing the types of impacts that's already made on higher ed institutions across the state, looking at the impacts that it's made for K-12 institutions, for principals associations, and wanting to say, like, that is important, and we need to make sure that that lasts for the long term. And also, how can the legislature now utilize some of those findings? And so wanting to see the legislature making sure that this investment stays sustainable for the long term, and really wanting to make sure that when we know the legislature is investing in it, they're also going to start to pay attention to the outcomes of that survey. And so, you know, the contribution that the foundation made to the University of Minnesota, along in partnership with the Joyce Foundation, into the principal survey was meant to be catalytic. I think I've heard you use the term catalytic a lot in the role of the foundation. And so that was meant to be catalytic, and now turning to the state and saying, hey, we think these findings are really important, and if you want to see these in the long haul, it's time for you to invest in it and to make sure it sustains for years to come.
Great. Can I see a raise of hands? Are there any principals in the room, or are they all working right now? Okay, so we've got a couple here. There are many people. Who else works in school administration right now? Because we have a few others there. I had some good conversations with you earlier, and I got some good feedback. I'm now going to turn to Katie Piquel, who leads this work, and people should know how much work she has done to connect this institution to those principals on the ground, superintendents and other leaders on the ground throughout the state. It's really been extraordinary to see this work. Why would we want to care so much about a principal survey? I mean, we have described this work to people and they've said, look, kids aren't reading, we're not, why are you messing around with this survey? Why are we messing around with the survey?
I think that's the question Dean Rodriguez asks every time he finds out I'm leading a survey. So the irony is my area of expertise is leadership. It's not measurement, as it is Dean Rodriguez's. However, it's because the principle matters. And if I asked every one of you in this room if your child or grandchild or special loved one went to a good school, you would probably say yes. And if you didn't, I might say, and how's the leadership? Principles matter. As a matter of fact, the most recent research done by Jason Grissom and colleagues have us understanding that principles not only contribute to retention of teachers, reduction in chronic absenteeism, but really, most importantly, if you have a good principal, and I'm not advocating we should be out replacing principals, so please hear me on that, but if you have a good principal in a building, you have the research shows you're going to have about 3 more months of growth in both reading and math at the elementary level. So that the principal really does matter. That is not to take away from teachers. Teachers are the #1 factor in student learning in the school building, but principals are too. And they hire the teachers, they retain the teachers, hopefully. So again, I would just say the principle matters.
Great. I remember a few years back hearing from Dr. Rodriguez about his really great work on research on social emotional development. And when I really got into it to try to figure out how did he track how students were evolving, it was the Minnesota Student Survey, which is mandated by the state, right? Is that a parallel to what you're trying to do here to bring principal voice consistently in?
We would hope so. So Minnesota is what I might characterize as a principal quiet state.
How many quiet principals do we have out there?
I know. More so in that their voice is not heard as much as we'd like it to be in policymaking at the legislature. And that isn't because legislators aren't listening, it's because there isn't really clear avenues to gain that voice. And your own illustration here this morning, how many of you are principals in the room? No, they're all working. They're in their buildings. And so the survey, I think, offers an opportunity for their voice to be heard in a really understandable way. And so my team here at the university takes those findings and as we've discussed, distributes them in ways that hopefully are really useful to folks. And we do think that legislators are one audience, and we've been very blessed to have them listening. But there are many other audiences. There's school boards, superintendents, the principals organizations, higher ed institutions. So we feel like the utility of the information is broad.
Great. Thank you very much. Representative, first up, the fact that you were even ambulatory after that long legislative session is impressive. We're very glad you're here. You've also brought the voice of education into the legislature. Can you just give folks just a little bit of background on your education background, but then why did you choose, out of all these different issues that you're dealing with the legislature, why dig into this issue of a principal survey?
First of all, I have been a teacher for 28 years, and kind of to answer your question, my why for doing this was not only being a teacher for 28 years, but I was on the school board, and I saw how much value it was listening to our principals on that. I'm sorry, I'm kind of nervous. But anyway, so there is a lot of value. As a teacher, I was getting a little frustrated with all these people in the House and the Senate making decisions about what I needed to do, and I was in a box, and so I decided I needed to run for office and be that one, that teacher in there that could go in and say, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. It's the same voice. The principals need a voice in how to run the schools. We tend to make a lot of decisions and a lot of laws that make a difference in schools, but there's no significant measure on, I'm sorry, there's no significant measure on how this is actually working in the schools. So that was my tie to that. And I just want to throw one other thing here too. I do have a trimmer, and the reason I'm pointing that out is being an amazing teacher, pat myself on the back. After about 20 years of teaching, a student hit me over the head with a chair, and I had a traumatic brain injury. And so about all that's left is the trimmer. My brain is good, I think. I'm told.
I know for a fact.
We agree. So again, with making these laws, we really need to touch base with the people who are on the ground to see how it's actually working, to see what kind of adjustments we need to make, and then also just to monitor the progress with it.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you. I want to ask just one final question. You've passed this, and that's great. Now envision yourself going back to the legislature next year and maybe 5 years from now. What are you going to be able to do because of this principal survey? What will you understand that you can't understand right now?
Okay. At this point, this bill has not passed, but we are going to work really hard next year.
I forgot that detail, sorry, yes. Pretending it had passed.
One thing that we're going to do is we are going to have some community meetings just to kind of really explain to the general population what it is, get more feedback from the principals on what they liked about the survey, and then also with that being part of it, just seeing what needs to change within the survey. So I think that the results or the data from the survey will give us the answers that we need to go forward. So we're excited.
Thank you. Well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Patrice Relaford. I am the Vice President of Collective Impact and Giving at the Minneapolis Foundation. And I'm going to invite the second panel to come up. And while they do that, I'll just level set a bit for this panel and just expand on some of the themes in the video. So some of you may be wondering, why literacy? Why is this an issue that here in the 2020s that we're so focused on? So I don't know about many of you, but the 90s seemed like they were 50 years ago, but they were only about 20-something years ago. So in 1999, our country, through Congress, convened what was called the National Reading Panel, and this was made up of experts from around the country. And Congress asked them to study what were the best and the most effective ways to teach reading to young people. Their work, which occurred over a year, led to a report in 2000 that basically reaffirmed the science of reading. But what didn't happen was this direct connection into the education system. And so there was a gap between what we knew from research and then the practice that was occurring in our schools. So it would be another few decades before many states, including Minnesota, would turn back to that. And again, what happened after that panel is that many schools continued being offered and using curricular materials and trainings and other professional development that wasn't grounded in the science of reading. So where are we today? In 2023, so just last year, our state made the bold move to pass legislation known as the READ Act. So what does the READ Act do? The READ Act has 3 pillars. So first, it supports our students by ensuring that they have access and that they're assessed to understand if they have any issues with reading, and then to alert their teachers. It also supports our teachers with professional development and other training to ensure that they are able to, and that they have access to curriculum and support to implement practices in their classroom that are based on the science of reading. And then last but not least, it ensures that our schools have resources at the district level and in individual schools to be able to purchase materials that are based and grounded in the science of reading. I have a really distinguished panel with me today, and I'm going to kick it off by introducing each of them as I awkwardly walk up these steps. Should have planned that out better and come up here first. Okay. I want to start with Dr. Jose Becerra Cardenas. Jose is a principal in Little Canada Elementary School in the Roseville area school district. He's been an educator for more than a decade. And in his school, he has the pleasure of leading almost like 2 schools within 1 school. And so one of his schools is a dual language Spanish immersion school. And then he also leads the neighborhood school within his building. So just going back to that theme that Dr. Rodriguez mentioned around the importance of neighborhood schools, but I also think it's great that he has an immersion background in being able to have 2 schools in 1 building. So thank you so much, Principal Jose Becerra Cardenas, for being here. I know it's really busy and hard for principals to get out of the building, so thank you. Next up, we have Catherine Campbell, from Groves Literacy Organization, where she leads Groves' partnerships with public schools. Catherine is an experienced teacher. She's also an experienced and exceptional coach, which is how I've met her, in her coaching work with other schools around how you implement teachers and leaders around how you implement literacy practices. So thank you so much, Catherine, for being here, and thank you so much for the work you do at Groves. Next up is Kim Gibbons. Kim is the director of the Center for Academic Research for Educational Improvement at the University of Minnesota. Kim has been an educator for over 20 years, and at Carey, she leads their partnerships with the Minnesota Department of Education around multiple issues, including the implementation of the READ Act. Last but not least, I have Representative Heather Edelson. And before I go into her bio, I just want to say congratulations on wrapping up her tenure in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and then also becoming is this how you say it, a county commissioner-elect? So what was that, about 2 weeks ago? So congratulations to Representative Edelson for wrapping up her time at the state legislature and then also continuing to be in public service. So Heather is the author, one of the main authors of the READ Act, and I think I'm gonna kick it to her just to start us off, and I'm wondering if you would tell people what the READ Act stands for, that acronym, and then also why you were interested in carrying this legislation, and then just anything else about your career that you'd like to add, or your personal experiences with literacy.
Thank you. Is this on? Oh, it is on. Wow, okay. Let's figure out where. Right here, I think, is probably the best. At the legislature, we always have to tell people to move their microphones down. You're like, don't eat the microphone. Yeah, I'm Heather Edelson. I represent Edina and Bloomington. I've always worked on education issues at the Capitol, from education policy to education finance. And my interest, I've been at the legislature for 6 years. Next week will be my last week. And when I first got to the legislature, I wanted to work on literacy right away. And the reason why is because of my own personal bio. A lot of lawmakers, when they run for office because of something personal to them, because it's hard. It might look like everybody likes you, but people do not like you. No, oh my goodness, do you get blamed for everything? So right when I got to the building, I said, who works on literacy? And I just want to give a shout out to Scott Krumquist and Deb Henton, who are here today, AMSD, and representing rural schools. And I just want to say, one of the first things I did, I was like, who works on literacy here? So I found it was a divided legislature when I came in, and Roger Chamberlain, a Republican in the Senate, was leading the initiative. And so we started to work and invest in letters, which I thought was great, but it wasn't enough. I always wanted to do more. And the reason I wanted to do more is because in 3rd grade, I was held back. I went to Willard in North Minneapolis, which was closed because of No Child Left Behind. And I was held back in 3rd grade. And I remember how just as I was driving here today, and I knew I was gonna tell this story again, I was thinking about how the 3rd grade classroom was in this one, it was like an L, and then the 4th grade classroom was here, and how terrible it felt when I had to be held back because I couldn't read. And that was literally why I was held back. They were like, she's smart, but she cannot read. And that stayed with me. And then when my kids were in 1st grade, I learned that they just were not learning how to read. And I thought, wow. So when we brought them, because we've done all right, I was the first one to go to college in my family, they said, well, who in your family has struggled to read? And I remember feeling like, you are blaming me. Are you blaming me? And so I felt kind of adversarial with this woman that's giving my kids a test. And so I found out they had dyslexia, and we worked on dyslexia for years at the Capitol. But there was a certain point, just when we got the majority, I said, should we only be looking at kids that have dyslexia? What about everybody else? And that's when that was kind of the evolution of the READ Act. And I just wanted to call it READ. You should ask Senator McQuaid what the acronym is for, because I was just like, this is going to be the READ Act. And then we fought with the governor's office about it, and she came up with she wrote it down. I don't remember what it is. But I was like, it's instructive. It's about reading. And she was like, no, let's make it like it's reinventing education. Who knows? But it's about reading, you guys.
I think I know what it stands for.
What is it?
I had a brain lapse. Okay, reading to ensure academic development. There we go.
Senator McQuaid gave you that. I just wanted kids to read.
Thank you so much, Representative Edelson. I'm going to turn it to Principal Dr. Jose Becerra Cardenas from the Roseville area schools. So as we learned in the video, Roseville has been leading on issues related to literacy. How did you know that you needed to act in your district? And then what did you do in your school in particular?
Okay. No, thank you for having me here today. Happy to be here. So we knew as a district, we believe that reading is a social justice issue of our time. And also this was because when we look at data, only 48% of our students were reading at grade level by third grade. And also when segregated the data and looking at the performance of students of color, then we look at our black students who are reading at proficiency at grade level. The percentage is like less than 40%. So then we needed to act, right? So that's when we decided to act. And this is why leadership matters, and it has been said before, but also why scholarly leadership matters, right? So decisions that are being made in collaboration, but also based on research too, right? And our current assistant superintendent, Melissa Sonic, led the English Language Arts program review, which was a 3-year process. And also this coincided with a curriculum review process. So as we were looking for new curriculum to implement for language arts, we were also doing this review as well. And under her leadership, she brought a committee together of representation from every elementary school in the district and also every grade level. And they worked together to find a literature review that they did together as a team, where over 100 pieces of literature were found about how students learn to read. And then that list kind of was brought down to 20 pieces of literature that included articles, texts, also podcasts and blogs, and the committee read all of this, right? So this was when they were making decisions as a committee, they had this strong knowledge base on how students learn to read. And so through this literature, we found that there were some things that we were doing well, but also there were some things that we needed to improve on. And Melissa brought forward the research about the science of reading and how students learn to read through explicit instruction, right? So then that's what's brought to the team. And as a team, it was recommended that we needed to be trained on the science of reading. And it was both, I think, leadership vision, right? But also this collaboration with teachers as well. And teachers saw the value of being trained and learning about the science of reading. And this was also during the time that the Minnesota Department of Education was offering letters training to teachers. So a lot of our teachers signed up for that because they saw the value and also because they wanted to improve practices, but also they wanted to make informed decisions as well. And in Roseville, our mission is excellence, innovation, and equity in all we do. And I believe that this work really encompasses that mission statement. So we continue on this journey of learning and unlearning. So just briefly, some of the changes that we have implemented so far, it has been a systemic change, right? So we knew that we needed to learn our way out of this problem, right? So in order to do that, we needed to invest in that training. So what we did, we used ESSER funds to train all of our kindergarten through 4th grade elementary school teachers district-wide. Also, we use, those funds to train pre-K teachers, special education teachers, English language learner teachers, all of the elementary principals and also district administration, right? So this was a whole systemic kind of change and approach. And we also reviewed, piloted, and this is the first year that we're implementing new language arts curriculum, both in English for our neighborhood schools, but also in Spanish for our dual language Spanish immersion program. So there is a strong focus in phonics, phonemics awareness, instruction in the primary grades, and at the same time, we're also implementing a knowledge-based curriculum in order to help our students to deepen their understanding on different topics as well. And then just one last thing that we have been doing this year, all of our professional development has been focused on letters training, on the science of reading, and also on the implementation of the new curriculum.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Roosevelt, you've been really, really busy. With the next question, I'd like to ask Catherine, because Catherine came over because Groves has a bit of an outside perspective, and so just wanting to zoom out a little bit and say, in your work with Groves, as you've observed schools and their literacy practices, what did you observe that wasn't working? And can you talk a little bit about why? And then how did your organization go about helping teachers and school leaders to change their instructional practices? And feel free to add a little bit about Groves for folks who might not be as familiar with your organization.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. It doesn't sound like, okay, now I can hear it. Okay, so the video you saw, that's spot on. We were teaching children to guess. We were basing it on theoretical observations and saying if a child doesn't need to look at every individual word, what they need to do is look at the picture, look at the first letter in that word, and figure out what the word is. Now, the picture could be a horse grazing in a meadow, and if that child didn't recognize H, putting in the word pony would have been okay. That's not okay. They're guessing. They were taught to read to the end of the sentence and then go back and guess and fill in what that word is or what you think it should be. So a lot of unproven strategies were being taught to children, and in fact what science tells us is that fluent readers attend to every single sound in a word, not every single letter, but every single sound. And as fluent readers in this room, we are doing that instantaneously. Our brains are doing that. And for emerging readers, it's a slower process. And it really translates to sounding out words, to paying attention to the individual sounds. So when we went in 8 years ago, 10 years ago, we've been doing this work for over 10 years now. And as Patrice said, I was the original coach as we developed the model. When we went into schools, what I would see is this practice going on. And instead of reading the decodable texts, those were the texts that had 95% of the words the student could read because they understood the rules that was mentioned in the video. Instead, they were reading leveled texts. So it was your just right reading level, and all it was doing was pick up a book. There's a bunch of sight words in here that you'll have to read because there's really not a lot of specific and explicit phonics instruction, and whichever book is just right for you, that's what we'll read. But it was lacking in vocabulary, lacking in building background knowledge for students. So when we went in, the first thing we had to do was get buy-in from the teachers. And our work focused on turning those teachers into master literacy instructors based on the science of reading. Teachers are the change agents in buildings. They're the ones that are working with the students and getting the outcomes of those students and impacting their reading ability. Principals are too, and principals, we find the most success in the schools where principals are really engaged in our partnership. We also knew that it was more than just professional development or putting a good curriculum in a classroom, that it's a package deal. It's getting buy-in from all of the teachers. It's coaching them as we bring in a new curriculum that aligns with the science of reading. It's bringing in professional learning so that teachers are understanding the why behind what they're teaching. And then it's, as we've mentioned before, as has been mentioned before, the data that we're collecting on students so that teachers can analyze that data and say, I have some students that are struggling. And tomorrow, here's what I'm going to do. Here's the targeted instruction that I'm going to implement in small group instruction to help those students. Before we ever went into a building and had a partnership with that school, simply because we were changing the culture of literacy in a building. Before we ever went in and partnered with them, we made a presentation to teachers. We told them exactly what the curriculum looked like. We told them what it would be like to have a coach in their classroom every single week. We laid it all out and answered all of their questions, and then we asked them to vote. And if we didn't get 90% buy-in, that was a school that we postponed starting a partnership with that year. So what needs to happen in classrooms is we need to take the science of reading, all that fabulous research that's out there, and teach to it. And yet it needs to be translated to best practices in the classroom.
Thank you, Catherine. So now we're going to zoom out a little bit more too with the U of M. So all roads lead through this beautiful campus, and just really excited to have the University of Minnesota at the table. And I believe the University of Minnesota, the role there is that you're involved directly with MDE in implementing the READ Act. Would you tell the audience a little bit more about like the mechanics of that role and what it means and the role you play in implementing this act?
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrice, and thanks for inviting me to be on this panel. I think that the spirit behind why Carrie is involved in the READ Act was really to form a solid research to practice partnership where we could leverage skills from both sides. The good news is that there's a lot of research out there as it pertains to literacy. We know what it takes to get kids to learn to read. We know what happens when kids don't learn to read. And we know a lot about the best ways to ensure that all of our kids are making progress. The bad news is while that research exists, there's something referred to as the research to practice gap. So it can sometimes take 17 to 20 years for good research to make its way into practice. So the work that we've been doing at Carrie is really trying to bring research to scale, bring it to practice, provide the supports, provide the resources and the technical assistance so that that research can be realized in practice and we can see those outcomes. So at Carrie, we have kind of 4 service areas. We have research, where we have people contributing to new knowledge. We do program evaluation. And then as it really relates to the READ Act, we have a strong literacy core. Some of you may remember the Minnesota Center for Reading Research, which has been around since, I don't know, about 2005. Michael, around that time. And that moved over to Carrie about 2.5 years ago. And so we've been doing a ton of work both in Minnesota and around the country, really bringing this research to scale. So we've have a statewide contract with Nevada for the past 2 years where we're training all of the teachers around what's been referred to as the science of reading. We're just ending a 4-year study in 50 schools in 10 states around the country that's focused on first grade and second graders, getting them to learn to read. That study is coming to an end, and we have seen some tremendous outcomes starting this work during COVID. And I think I'll just end with our partnership with MDE and kind of where we're at with that role. We're also one of 19 federally funded comprehensive centers in the United States, funded by the federal government. So we're Region 10, and we work with the state departments of Minnesota and Wisconsin, focusing on the state level to bring research to scale and evaluate the impact. So our work in Minnesota has really been centered. We've had a partnership for 5 years. We've been working on building and implementing the Minnesota MTSS framework. And I think that when we talk about the READ Act and all of the components in the READ Act, that's really mirroring the work that we've been doing both in Minnesota and around the country. So right now, our partnership is what we've accomplished so far. We've identified 5 literacy curricula that are on a list that really just shows that these programs are well aligned to structured literacy. We've managed a reconsideration process. Once the list was released in January, publishers had an opportunity to submit additional information. We've made it through that. We've identified 3 professional learning programs that provide options for all of the districts can pick from one of those options to get all teachers trained. And we're just now, after we've just made it through the curriculum process, we're starting to build out a coaching framework. So we're going to be providing coaching to the regional literacy networks that are set up in each of the Minnesota service cooperatives. We're going to train those literacy specialists to then train all of the district specialists. That it's required that every district have a literacy specialist in place. What is it, Heather, by 2027?
Yes, and we're calling them literacy leads.
Literacy leads,
yeah, I know.
okay.
There's a whole name thing there, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's been a lot of changes with REDAC 2.0 in the last 2 months. So that's really where we're at. We're excited to be at the table, but as RT said in the beginning, like this work, it takes a village, and there are so many different partners. And ultimately what we're trying to impact is students and the 500,000 students right now that aren't proficient readers, and try to change that trajectory.
Thank you, Dr. Gibbons. So on that note of it takes a village, I wanted to turn back to Dr. Cardenas. And just from your perspective in your building, what are you hearing from teachers, students, parents, as they watch sort of you all transform how you teach literacy? Like, what type of feedback are you getting?
Sure. So like I mentioned earlier, like we have this year implemented a core knowledge curriculum, also a phonemic awareness curriculum, and a phonics curriculum. In my building, I'm lucky that I'm seeing it in 2 languages, so it's like multiple curriculums going on this year, so it's been fun to watch. Also, we as instructional leaders know that transformational sustained change happens when we integrate emotions into learning, right? So this is particularly significant to this context because we have a lot of teachers who have been teaching reading a certain way for like 10, 15, 20 years. So when this new learning comes, that means that practices have to change, right? So we are acknowledging that it is a heavy lift for our teachers. So they're not only unlearning, but also they're changing practice too, right? So we are tending to those emotions as we move the work forward. And also we're listening, taking feedback, and making changes, and moving the work forward, right? So what I'm seeing in the primary grades, for example, like now I see like explicit instruction in phonics and phonemic awareness going on in all of the classrooms. You see teachers using kind of the same hand motions, or even the way that they move their hands or their fingers, like we're seeing that K2, right? We look at data for 3rd grade, 4th grade, and because these students hadn't received any phonics or phonemic awareness instruction prior, they are now receiving that this year as well. So to bridge that gap of knowledge too. So also, like, I'm talking to parents, and then they're seeing like some of those strategies being transferred when they listen to their kids read. So they're now like using the decoding of words, right? And also when I go into classrooms, like even on the upper grades, I know we are implementing a knowledge-based curriculum that is more rigorous than before. So we're having teachers kind of bridging that and providing scaffolds for students to access the curriculum. But then it's fun for me to watch, like I go into a 5th grade classroom in our neighborhood school, they have read the Odyssey, and now they're having conversations about that as a class and building knowledge, right? So they're like building on each other's kind of comments as students. And then I go across the hallway into my DLI classroom, and they have read Don Quixote now, and they're also having conversations about reading and what they're reading in class as well, right? So students are seeing themselves as kind of these knowledge builders as well, and they're part of the conversation. So we don't have teachers just kind of lecturing to them or giving them the answers. They are the ones who are coming up with the answers and building on each other's answers as well. So I think it does take effort. And intentionality from principals too, right? So we're, like I said, like intentional about listening to them, but also providing supports to teachers. It's not just about the listening part. They also want to see what are we doing about what their feedback that they're giving, right? So what we're doing, like we're having, like giving an uninterrupted time once a week for an hour so they can come together as teams and debrief how kind of the implementation of the curriculum is going, and also providing feedback to us about how that is going, and then we can kind of implement changes or make accommodations based on that feedback. But then that doesn't mean that we stop the work, right? We continue with the work, but we'll just kind of being flexible and responsive as well.
Thank you. I want to do a brief commercial break by asking my colleagues to shift to the slide with the QR code, because I do, once we wrap up with the questions, want to give you all an opportunity to submit questions. So we have that up there. If you know how to use fancy QR codes to submit questions, we will take some of those questions at the end. Just have a few more questions before we do that. And so I wanted to turn it to Catherine, and I want to maybe just ask you, for a district like Roseville that's deep in this work, given that Groves, you've seen what's happened when schools are further out, what can parents, students, and the community like sort of look forward to once you've been doing this for years and you've been teaching literacy based on the science of reading?
Well, first of all, I think the READ Act is a game changer. What we're going to see is success. We're going to see success in classrooms. We're going to go into classrooms and see teachers who are well-versed in the science of reading and implementing the curriculum that they're using with strong fidelity. So they're going to see the data that they collect. They're going to see those student numbers go up. Students are going to become readers. And in the next couple of years, teachers are going to dig deeper into that data, into thinking about their students and now, what can I do more to keep everybody engaged, to keep everybody on this trajectory? I think what we'll see and what parents will see is that students will be reading grade level text. They'll be reading easily the content textbooks in 4th and 5th grade, because in kindergarten through 3rd grade, they truly did learn to read. So now they can use their reading to learn. There will be a lower case load for intervention teachers because more children will have learned to read. And that's one of the additions of the READ Act this year is strong intervention. In addition, all children will be taught the rules of our language, but that's not the only thing. It's not just phonics we're talking about. They'll all be developing their vocabularies. They'll be building the background knowledge that they need so that when they open a book or open a textbook, they'll understand what's being discussed in that passage. Parents, I think parents will just love seeing their children coming home and reading and picking up a book, doing their homework with ease. And I think especially the READ Act leans into our multilingual learners. It also reads into our really kind of high need areas and students that are very transitional and potentially moving from school to school. If we're all teaching the same thing, they're going to jump right back into a classroom based on the reading of the science of reading. I think long term, 15 years from now, imagine the entry-level job positions that are out there, and literate individuals are applying for those jobs. And 20 and 25 years from now, we're not going to be dealing with the level of illiterate workforce that we are right now. So this truly will move the needle for Minnesota. So our goal, I just have to finish with our goal is that all children are reading at grade level, and this is about the kids.
Thank you, Catherine. So I want to turn it back to Representative Edelson, and just as you sort of think about, this was a significant undertaking and a lot of work for you. What are you excited about in terms of what you believe is ahead for us? And then as you think about your colleagues who will continue to be at the House, like any advice for them, or just what would you like to say, like in terms of what people should be thinking about as we move ahead, and just about or in terms of reflecting on the work that it took to make this happen?
Okay, sorry. This is like, I feel this in my heart. Like I genuinely just, I'm listening to all the words, because there's often times that these things that I start crying, because I've heard so many stories across our state. I've heard from our educators. I think the video covered it, that not making sure that we're not blaming each other. And we have done that the entire time. It's just making sure that we're listening. And I always feel like at the Capitol, I was a conductor, right? Of like the symphony that was happening, because there was all these brilliant teachers and educators and principals. And so what we did last year with the READ Act was we set the foundation. And we always talk about, I work on mental health and literacy, so excuse me, I'm just going to deviate here, but just like in mental health, that system is not completely built. Around literacy, we're doing the same thing. And so last year, we built the foundation. And this year, we started, the agreement is that we are no longer going to teach the old way, because kids need to be explicitly taught how to read. We need to give them that power. And then after that, this year, Kenneth, you came to my office, and we were like, when we're doing the reading audit, and Kenneth is like, let's do a report on it. And I was like, great idea, let's do that. That reading report will be the work for Future Ahead. I'm looking at Representative Clardy, because she's taking over, and RT and Minneapolis Foundation. This is something we're gonna need your help with. The reading audit is happening in higher education right now, and a report will come to the legislature in the years to come, next year and the year after. And higher education's not totally there. Thank you, Dr. Gibbons and University of Minnesota. But higher ed's not all there. And so teachers are being taught a way that's not what what is actually the READ Act is saying we want to do. We need to fill that gap, and I think the Minneapolis Foundation has a great opportunity to help there, and all of you do as well. I think, looking at making sure our kids get these delivered systems, that saves our state money, but it's also good for these kids. It's good for the teachers. I saw this great TikTok video of this teacher that sent it to me, was like, she was dancing and she's getting in her car and she's like, I'm on my way to a training that will actually help me in my profession. And it was the READ Act training. And it was literally, again, tears came to my eyes. But not only do we have that, we're adding a third screener because it's best practice this year. We just did 2 last year. And I'm telling you, the READ Act last year, persistence matters. I always talk about my story, how I grew up to a single mom, took public transportation my whole life, very poor, because I learned how to be persistent really fast, and that's what you have to be at the Capitol. So that's what we need in terms of the READ Act, because it had bumps. People wanted to stop it. People felt blamed and shamed. We didn't do that. And I think to the future, it's making sure those, I think you said essentially waiting to fail in my mind is what we have done in our educational system. Parents came to me and said, I just need the 504 won't give my kids this. My kids have IEPs, but not everybody's do. And so we were waiting for kids to fail in order to get them the interventions they needed. We need to not do that anymore. We need to be the state that leads. And I am so proud that when I think about the READ Act for the state of Minnesota, we are leading the nation with what we have done. And it was not easy. And it was not one person. It was an army of people. And when I think about 27,000 people right now are going through the training in the next year, we are building an army of literacy people that are saying no more with the old way. We don't want your gimmicks. We want to teach our kids how to read. We want to have an educated society, and we want to make sure that everybody has access, not just those that can afford that training for private interventions. So I am just proud, and I don't know if I totally answered your question, but you can see I'm a little passionate on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Edelson. And before we transition to questions, I want to turn it back to Dr. Gibbons from the University of Minnesota and just ask you to reflect on some of those things too. What will it take for this to be a success from your perspective?
That's a great question. I think the first thing to remember is there's no quick fix for ensuring that all of our students will be proficient readers. You know, the past few months, there's been a lot of focus on curriculum because there were a bunch of curriculum that were reviewed, and there's a list. But that's just one part of the success formula. And it really, I think, starts with having high expectations for all kids. And then we have to have a number of different elements in place. And those are things like starting with professional learning for teachers on the research that we know that will guide the instruction that we're providing. We also know that while there's been a big investment in the past with letters, we're focusing on professional learning, the transferring that learning to practice isn't easy, and that is why there needs to be some coaching that's built in so that we can help bridge that gap between the professional learning and then going back into systems and looking at the curriculum and the assessments that we're using. We, of course, need curriculum that are aligned with the evidence. Although there is a list, I'm here to say that the 5 on the list, nothing is 100% aligned with what we want to see. It's about 80% aligned with what we want to see, but I think a big factor is the things that are on the list don't have the things we don't want to see, and we call those red flags. We also need evidence-based intervention materials. We start with that universal curriculum for all, but there are going to be some students that need that extra support. So that's another thing we're going to be focusing on now, is shifting to interventions. And what are those? We need assessments for screening and progress monitoring and evaluating our outcomes. We need our educators to engage in collaborative work together, to look at the data that they're collecting and use that to drive their decision making. We need sufficient time allocated to instruction. We need a framework to organize all of those practices, and we have that in Minnesota due to the MTSS framework. And I think going back to our first panel, we need leaders. They need to be knowledgeable and really leaning in and leading this work. And so kudos to Katie and her team for really lifting up that voice of leaders. So the MDE, the CARI MDE partnership through the READ Act supports all of those different elements. I think that we also have to recognize that for this to be successful, we have to stay the course. We're not gonna see dramatic change in 2 years. We're at the beginning of implementation, and we need to continue operating under a continuous improvement framework. Mississippi is often lifted up as a state that has seen significant improvements and outcomes, but remember, they passed their law in 2013, and 2019 is when they saw statistically significant outcomes, and their work and that investment continues to this day. So we are going to need to have this continued investment and partnership and work with all of our different partners to really, I think, realize that success that we're looking for. And finally, we need to continue the intentional focus on equitable outcomes for all students. And that is going to start with disaggregating data to ensure that all of our students are progressing and making progress. And I think it's really important that we focus on students that are coming from historically marginalized backgrounds. We currently have the largest literacy opportunity gap in the country right now between Black and white students. And I think getting to that whole area of equity, going back to the curriculum, just as I said that nothing on the list was 100% aligned with the research on structured literacy, after reviewing 42 curricula that are used across the country, there isn't one that's free of bias either. And that is, and thank you, Representative Edelson, for putting in more money this year that will help MDE and our partnership take more of a critical deep dive into this. That our timelines were quick. We couldn't read every single story at every grade level across 42 curriculum. We took a sampling approach. And I think the ones on the list have the least amount of bias, but it's important to remember they're not perfect, and we're going to continue to really work with the publishers on that list and use the resources to really dig in deeply and involve our communities, our families in that work. So I guess I'll just end with saying that we need to continue to focus on our partnerships. And most importantly, I think that's our families and our communities. And I'm going to try not to get choked up too, but I just have to really thank the legislature, our bill authors, Representative Edelson and Senator McQuaid, for giving us the foundation and the resources to start this work. All of the elements are there. I've been in education 28 years. I've seen these changes in districts I have worked in, districts I have supported, and it's possible. It is hard work. This has probably been the hardest year of my career, but it's the most meaningful work of my career, and that's what I'm focused on. And so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. You're my hero, and I'm sorry you're leaving, but grateful to you, Representative McClarty, that you're going to take the helm here.
Yes, you can say two more.
Sorry, just two things. So I think the data desegregation is so critical, which is why we did it. I just want to make sure everybody in this room knows. How we collect data from MCAs, which are not great indicators of whether or not a child can read. Now we are doing that for all the FastBridge or all the Dibble, because everybody starting next year, all the kids are going to be screened, right? And then they will be provided intervention. But we will desegregate that data. We put in money and technology for MDE to look at that. So we know the same way MCAs are desegregated, we are going to have that at the state level, because I know that had to be privately funded before, which is not okay, right? We should be able to do this as a state. And then the other thing just to know is that this year we sent $66 million are going out in the next 2 months to all the districts throughout the state of Minnesota for teacher compensation, as well as loosening those READ Act dollars, which was at $35 million, which we had never tied. We'd never actually done what we did. And you know, Dr. Gibbons might not have wanted to, but I'm pretty persistent when I want something, and I wanted the curriculum to be vetted. And so it shouldn't be a shock to us that there were bias, but there was also a lot of materials. Not only was it biased and some of it very racist, it wasn't teaching kids how to read. It was a twofer bad. So I just want to thank you for doing that, because we can't pretend to not know. Like, we just can't be blind anymore on these issues. We need to know, and we need to lean into those hard conversations. So thank you.
Thank you. What an excellent panel. I want to give them all a round of applause. Dr. Cardenas, Representative Edelson, Catherine Campbell, and Dr. Kim Gibbons. I'm wondering if anybody submitted any questions through the fancy QR code. Did anything come in? Okay, you have some questions?
Lots of questions. Lots of questions. So, hello everybody, good morning. I'm Maggie McCracken. I'm the Senior Director of Engagement at the Foundation, and I have all of your amazing questions. Ashley, who is new to our team in philanthropic services, is going to join me. And so what I'm hoping to do...
We actually poached Ashley from Groves.
Yeah, sorry, but we're super excited, so yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick off a couple of questions to you all. The first panel as well, if there are additional things that you feel like you want to weigh in on, let me know. We can bring a microphone around to you. And then we'll open up to the room and we'll kind of go back and forth if that's okay. Okay, so a couple of first questions that I'll bounce out. One is, how will READ Act 2.0 impact Cary, districts, and teachers? And the second one that I'm going to go ahead and tee up is for you, Jose. Let me get to it. My son is in kindergarten at a Spanish immersion school. How do you apply the science of reading to immersion education? What's changing about how immersion teachers and parents are being trained to best support their emerging readers? I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Jose, would you maybe want to go first?
Sure. So we also have our DLI teachers trained on letters as well, right? So I think that's just having that common understanding of how students learn to read. The curriculum that we're using this year is also very explicit. We have a skills portion of it, K2. So we're teaching students to read in Spanish through explicit instruction as well. So just same thing, but in a different language.
And then REDAC 2.0, anybody want to comment more on that?
Yeah, I can
Remind me the question.
Yeah, absolutely. How will REDAC 2 impact Cary, districts, and teachers?
So we okay. So I guess we're gonna be wrapping up the curriculum review, which has taken a long time. Sorry, that has it's a lot of work, you guys.
12,000 hours.
I know. Don't open this one with her. Okay, so we're going to be transitioning over, so they can do that work. Cary can do that work around preparing our literacy leads, who are going to be our essentially teachers that are going to be able to help all the other teachers that are going through training. They're going to be the resource. They're going to know how to follow the science, up-to-date things that are happening. You're going to be also releasing intervention materials starting this November to the following November on a rolling basis. They also, Cary and regional centers are also going to be doing a volunteer, and I know she's like, why do you keep sending my stuff my way? There's a lot of work to be done. There's going to be training volunteers and paraprofessionals. We agreed to a smaller amount of time because 8 hours is what we agreed to. Again, this is not just me. This is a large group of people. So that's what I think. Anything else did I miss?
No, other than I just want to highlight that it's not just Cary. We're part of a partnership team with MDE, so we are jointly doing this work, and and I think the work that we're going to be doing with the regional literacy and MTSS networks around the state is going to, I think, be a really strong collaboration to make sure that we're a big state, and I think what we're aiming for is some consistency and clarity around the state, and not every region making up their own approach to how this work is going to be done. So it's a shift. I mean, it's a shift. We are a local control state, and there's a lot of things that have come out lately through the READ Act, which are necessary, but is a little bit more prescribed, I think, than what's happening. So, yeah.
A lot of adult behavior change. So in 2019 actually, we brought 1,500 kids to the Minneapolis Convention Center for a student conference. And a lot of what they said was like, don't look at us, look at the adults, get them to do the changing. So definitely. Any other questions?
Lots. If you did not submit a question here in the room and you have one, please raise your hand and Ashley will pop over. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going here. So, Catherine, this one is about Groves. And so would love to have you, the question is, how will Groves' work change now that the READ Act has been implemented?
What is in the READ Act, we've been doing the whole time Groves Literacy Partnerships has been in existence and beyond. So we started as an academy for children that learn differently, and we've always used the science of reading to teach our students to read. It wasn't called the science of reading 50 years ago, but it was that explicit systematic instruction. We love that the READ Act is in place now because it really supports what we've been doing in classrooms. One thing we don't have to do is we don't have to take a teacher vote anymore because the state is saying this is the way you need to teach. We'll still go in and explain our partnership and answer teacher questions. And what we would really like to do is also lean into, what does a literacy lead look like? What do they need to, what are the requirements of that? Because right now in all of our partner schools, we train what we call in-house coaches because they are the literacy leader in the building at the end of 3 years. And so that needs to align with what's written in the READ Act. And if we have in-house coaches that then can move into a literacy lead position in a district because they've already had much of the training and they have now less things that they have to finish to become that literacy lead for a bigger organization.
That's great. This one, Kim or Katie, probably. Are there changes in the college and university curriculum for education majors to learn this new approach to teaching reading? And I can come up here.
I don't think that's a Kim question.
Okay.
Because
Sorry.
I'm kind of centered over at Carrie in the K-12 space, so I'll either turn it to Katie or Michael.
Either. Here you go, Katie.
Here's what I can say. So our teacher education program absolutely ensures that our teachers leave the University of Minnesota being able to teach kids how to read. There's national rankings that come out about education programs. Those are often related to instructor syllabi. But I can say this, I've had the opportunity to talk extensively with our Director of Teacher of Education and many of our instructors, and I would feel comfortable hiring teachers from the University of Minnesota's teacher education program. I insist that my husband hire teachers from the University of Minnesota's teacher education program. So rest assured, our teachers are coming out knowing and understanding the science of reading.
I thought I saw one in the middle of the room. Someone had their hand up.
Oh, great. Ashley's right.
Thanks so much. I'm Brenda Child, and I am a professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota. So I spend my time teaching history, and so I see students at a certain stage where they've succeeded and so forth. But I think because I'm a historian and I've written about the history of American Indian education, I come to this topic with a deep skepticism from our long experience. And so one of the things I noticed when I first came back to Minnesota and started teaching here at the university is that every year when the standardized test results came out, the schools with American Indian populations had the lowest test scores in the state of Minnesota, year after year after year. And I think for a lot of us who work in education, and I'm from Red Lake in northern Minnesota too, so I'm from northern Minnesota. We sort of switched our areas of interest, maybe, to Dakota and Ojibwe language revitalization in education, because we thought, if we're not succeeding in these schools, at least we want our children to be culturally literate and understand our languages and so forth. And there was just a story yesterday here at the U about our new Dakota language major. And my daughter graduated from the U last spring, and she majored in Ojibwe language, and she's teaching little kids up on the Fond du Lac Reservation. So I guess my question is, and I'm not saying anybody should be able to answer this, but our goal is not to have kids read the Odyssey, right, in our tribal schools. We want our own culture and language to be at the foreground of their experiences. So as I sit here and listen, I'm wondering, does any of this apply to our American Indian students who have been at the bottom of the ranks in success in schooling in Minnesota?
Well, I would just say American Indian students are in all of the public schools all over the state, right? And those kids need to learn how to read as well. And so I think we're providing opportunities that go across all cultures. And I honestly, I'm very excited about it. But I mean, I see what you're saying. It's not going to necessarily
Well,
teach.
it's not something that I feel like any of you can have an immediate answer toward. But these are very deep issues and persistent issues for us, especially because for American Indian people, we want to, in some ways, stay out of the mainstream. We don't always want to be in, the middle of what we've tried to stay apart, and that's what tribal sovereignty is also about. And I think part of that applies to education. So maybe it's just a kind of thought that, just maybe think a little bit about this and how it might apply to Dakota and Ojibwe communities in Minnesota, because we may not, respond with the same enthusiasm. Now we're going to have a new method that's going to lead to academic success, right? That it's maybe a little more complicated. So I'm not looking for any of you to have like an answer, but maybe just to think a little bit about our tribal communities in Minnesota and what their goals are when it comes to education.
Yeah, I would just like to add too that I think that the resources that Representative Edelson has committed for the cultural responsivity work is needed. One of the things that came out in our review, there's a woman at MDE that's helped us with the curriculum review. Her name is Lucy Arias. She's I believe, a member of the Ojibwe tribe, and there have been some curricular materials that have been identified that could be very disparaging towards American Indians. And so we've already reached out to I'm forgetting what the name is, Bob. It's tribal, there's a tribal, not tribal nations, there's a...
For the 11 tribes?
I don't know. Yeah, yes, thank you. TMAP, was that what you... Yes, yes. So we've engaged in conversations with them, and also Carlos Mariano. We've had a discussion with him, and are looking to use some of the resources that you've provided to pull in that voice, so that we can start identifying Native American literature that can be pushed in and supplementing the curriculum, because it's important that that is acknowledged, and it's important that we're really trying to make sure that in our materials that kids can see themselves, that they see themselves represented in positive ways.
But I will just say that it's a good question, and there were stories that were actively harmful to Native people that we worked with publishers. Yeah, they're pulled now. They're pulled, and so I value your question. Thank you.
Can I just add? I just want to add, from the educational perspective, this is all great conversation and it's a great question. And when using a curriculum that's based on the science of reading, that's explicit, systematic, multimodal, there is evidence that shows that all students learn to read. So it's an effective model, and yes, all of this other conversation is very important too.
Oh, sorry, I'm Christine Osorio, Superintendent in North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale, and I just want to add a comment about the whole working with TNEC and Indian education. I know for my school district, we jumped on the science of teaching reading a few years back and invested hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours in training a whole cohort of practicing teachers to first do the research together and learn together and then work on our curriculum adoption process. But our Indian Education Department was front and center through that entire process. And to your point earlier, there is no perfect curriculum. And the one that we landed on, Amplify CKLA, is one that has many flaws. But with the help of our Indian Education Department and working with the publisher, we have really, really vetted and combed every single unit of study and incorporating that knowledge content. If you think about the knowledge piece of learning and being able to bring in content areas, you know, there's a huge opportunity. And again, we spend a lot of time talking about the fact that it's not just about educating our Native students to learn to read and write, but also that all of our students understand our Native American history in our state and in our country, and understand multiple different perspectives for learning. And I think one of the key ingredients is who's at the table when you're doing the research, and who's at the table when you're vetting materials, and how you're deciding how you're going to incorporate it. So I just want to put in a plug for that. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is just a piggyback off of an area, not the same, that you had mentioned. We have our EL population that's the fastest growing and most geographically diverse population in the state, but yet we have like over 100 schools that have no EL teachers but have EL learners. So that's something that we as a state need to be held accountable for, and with the READ Act, I think that that's going to help us some, but we also need to make that shift and make sure that that is occurring.
Thank you. I just wanted to piggyback off of the other question about higher ed. I am an educator. I'm a reading specialist out of the University of Minnesota. I teach at Normandale Community College right now, so I teach students that are coming through that really could have benefited from having the READ Act. I also am a school board member in Edina, and I really appreciate the work. Our teachers will tell you that they're seeing the difference. So that speaks volumes. My question is similar to the one that was asked before about higher ed. And I know that, Katie, you spoke to that, and obviously your circle of influence is the University of Minnesota, but unless we fix that pipeline of teachers that are coming into the classroom, districts are on the hook for a lot of money to retrain these teachers. And so as much as possible, I think that really needs to be a focus as we continue to build on that foundation that you've eloquently talked about, Representative Edelson, to just make sure that we're fixing that pipeline that's feeding us those teachers.
So the reading audit that Pelsby is doing right now for higher education is going to be completed in 2027. And so starting next year, there will be a report that will be open to the public that will show where Pelsby is in that reading process in evaluating higher education and if they're meeting the standards. Because exactly that is, the READ Act should be, at least the teacher training part of the READ Act, that component of it, should not go on forever. So this should be injections of one-time money for the next few years, and then hopefully we have fixed that entire structure. Of course, there will always be, because other people might come, teachers might come from other states. There's going to be other things, but it shouldn't be the extent in which we're having to invest right now.
And just in case people aren't familiar with it, Pelsby is the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board. It's a pretty important body in Minnesota, and that in order for your license to be valid, it has to be accredited through Pelsby. Were you going to add something, Kenneth?
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quickly, about this reading audit. Yes, Representative Edelson was really responsive when I came to her and elevated this issue. We can't just teach our current teachers how to teach it if we're not addressing our future teachers. And so, the READ Act is still is iterative, right? We have READ Act 2.0. Maybe Representative Clardy, you're going to be doing READ Act 3.0. We still have work to do, and so as practitioners, as leaders, continue to have thoughts, questions, concerns, I think it's important to continue to bring them to our legislators and try to problem solve around how can we make sure that we plug up all these holes while also acknowledging that we've made a lot of significant progress along the way.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Good morning. Does this work? Yes. Good morning. I'm Dave Moore. This is an amazing program. My first in a long time thank you to Minneapolis Foundation for attracting people like me. I'm a retired arts manager and an amateur in education, but my wife and I care very much, and we have a fund at the Minneapolis Foundation, so this is educational for me. I came here in part because I noticed that the agenda would be what we've spent most of this morning on, which is reading instruction in early childhood, and it's fantastic. I've learned a lot. I also was interested to learn about leadership development in school principals, and I think time is not going to permit much focus on that today. I would encourage, if there's enough interest in this room and elsewhere in the education community, I'd encourage exploration of that. I do see online, thanks to Google, that the university does have what appears to be a master's in leadership skills for educators. I'd love to learn about that. What are the strengths and weaknesses of that program? How can it be improved? And is it scalable? Because there are, I assume, thousands of school principals in the state, and my philosophy would be that they all can benefit from recurring leadership skills training. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. So we are running out of time. What I would tell you is there's a lot of questions that we might not get to, but what we will do is I will work with Patrice and the panelists today to actually grab some responses to the questions that we don't get to, and we'll share that back out with the group. So thank you so much for all the questions. I'm going to tee 2 more questions up, and then I'll let you close us out, okay, Patrice? So one, maybe with Catherine and Jose, to talk about how you're engaging parents as you're moving through this. And so I'll start there, and then I have one more that maybe we'll use.
Sure. So what we've done at Little Canada, and also I know other elementaries are doing this. So we have information nights for families where we are talking about the science of reading with them and what that means for the new curriculum that we're implementing. So we're having those conversations with families, like, this is the why, and this is what we're doing about it. So then they know what to expect when they go into classrooms and talk to teachers, and also what to expect when students go home as well. So we're having those conversations, being intentional with families.
That's great. And Catherine, maybe as you're working with your partner schools,
Right.
what have you seen in terms of what they're doing?
And we have, as I said before, we work with the teachers. They're kind of our direct relationship. But we get a lot of questions on how do I explain this to parents? What should I be sending home? And so we do provide supplemental materials that can go home as homework. We also provide a slideshow, for example, for their open house so that they can really explain what the partnership with Groves Literacy Partnerships looks like. So we try to be nimble and respond to the teacher's needs for the parent group in their classroom.
Great. And this last one, I think, is actually referencing the earlier panel. And so I'm going to probably turn it over to you, Kenneth, which is what can we in the audience do to help pass the principal bill next session?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, the principal survey, we got a lot of positive momentum, and we have a couple of key legislators in the room today who helped us, at least get the bill heard, introduced, and we talked about in committee. And so yeah, I'd say continue to engage your principal or your legislators, and actually engage any principals that you may know, and really share with them, like, hey, if you haven't filled out the principal survey, you should, even though, what is it, over 40% of principals across the state did fill it out, which is amazing numbers. But yeah, ask them to tell their legislators, like, this is an important priority. We think the state should continue to, or start funding this, and we would love your support, and tell them to send that email to their legislators as well. I think, the more voices that they hear from around the importance of this, the more that is going to elevate to the top of their priority list. And we're excited to have such excellent partners already to get this across the finish line next year.
Thank you all so much for being here. Before I transition to my closing remarks, I want to thank the panel again. Thank you all so much. It was just, like, I sort of feel, yeah, just what a great combination of experiences and just the commitment to literacy in our state. I really appreciated being on the stage with you all. As I think about my work at the Minneapolis Foundation, in a lot of ways I think of myself as a DJ in a lot of ways. So RT is a rapper, I am a DJ. I assemble things that then lead to incredible experiences. And so that's what I felt like I did with this panel. So I'm just really excited that you all were able to do this, and I just really appreciate your commitment, and your responses were incredible. So what can you look forward to from the Minneapolis Foundation in terms of our education work as we move forward? So this week, I am opening our 4th grant round as part of our Reimagine education strategy. I have updated some of the guidance in that grant round to have an explicit focus on supporting schools to implement literacy instruction based on the READ Act and the science of reading. And I know Katie will help me with this. I will be doing outreach to schools to encourage them to apply for funding for that. Because again, I know that they have the state funds, but there could be other needs that they have. And so just look forward to more from that, from the foundation in terms of the work that we'll be supporting this fall. I also would like for you all to if you're capable, to join us in supporting this grant round. So we have our funds at the foundation, and I have a budget for this grant round, but last year we had 2 generous donors who contributed additional resources that allowed me to fund more organizations. So if you have a fund with us, or even if you don't, feel free to talk to one of our staff members from our philanthropic services team, Maggie being primarily amongst them here today. And I know we have maybe some other staff in the room from the philanthropic services team about contributing to our education grant legacy fund. And then that allows us to distribute more resources in the fall through our annual grant round. I'm also excited to announce too that We will be making this summer an investment in Minneapolis Public Schools of approximately $250,000 for their efforts to address teacher shortages and to recruit and retain diverse teachers. So I've been at the foundation for 8 years. What about the teachers? What about the teachers? What about the teachers? We support teachers, and we also recognize the efforts of districts like Minneapolis Public Schools to support their educators to be able to lean into so many of the changes that are happening in our classroom. And then to speak to the issue of culture and diversity, I also just want to applaud districts like Minneapolis Public Schools who are recognizing that we need to do more to retain diverse educators from different cultural backgrounds, also even men who are coming back to teaching. So just want to recognize that and make that announcement. I want to thank you all for joining in this discussion. A lot of times I think about the role of a community foundation, and again, RT mentioned this. We've been here for over a century, we're here for good, but none of that work happens without people in community. So educators, fund holders, everyone has access to us. We are a place where people who have the capacity to give $20 or people who have the capacity to give $10 or $1,000 or nothing at all come together to learn about issues and to act, to think, learn, and act together. So I just want to thank you all for being here and just look forward to more events like this one from us in the coming years. And then finally, I try not to do too much broadcasting and projecting, but just know that in 2025, I'm hoping to announce a big investment in literacy in Minneapolis. So stay tuned for that as well, because we're committed to this work, and as a foundation, we are invested. So thank you all for being here, and we'll get you those responses too. Thanks, everyone.